My parents have both passed, and as many other people, it took some time for me to begin to go over the process of going through their personal belongings. It was there that I found an interesting 2-page personal diary of my great-great-great-grandmother. At first, it was a little confusing. Paper it was written on was a type I had never seen. The style of the writing was that of a very old type. However, the date was /97, and it was obvious that she had written this diary, hoping that somebody would read it someday and let her story be told. It was the story of her and her march through a trail of tears. Her name was Abby Hoyt, and she was at least 90 years old when she was writing this. There had been some damage, and it was written in English, but very old English, and it's very hard to read. But I was able to get some of the information. The first thing was her describing, the soldiers came and forced me and my young son George, who happens to have the same name as my father, to come and congregate in the middle of our meetings. At first I thought it was my grandmother who wrote it, but the date made no sense. She would have only been 5 years old at the time, and my father would not be born until the year 1915. With force and no patience for my belongings, Abby went on to write, I joined the many who had already been congregated into the center of the camp. My son, George, was my life and the only reason for my living. He was a young boy of 4 at the time and would be forced to march for what would be known later as the Trail of Tears. I was due to have a child sometime in the fall, and the walk was unbearable. We had many bad nights, and some soldiers were very threatening to me and my family. My son was born in a riverbed where I was forced to camp, even though the water had not dried up completely. We had no chairs and were sitting on crates. We had one blanket to share between us, and the weather was getting cold. As each mile passed, we had less and less, and now my 2 sons had but one blanket for each of them, and the weather was getting chilly. Food was scarce, and my husband shot our dog for food. The poor thing, he was starving and he provided no meat. I love my son so much, and from the fever, my baby died. I buried him on the trail and was now left with just George. He was my only son, and I loved him so much. Unfortunately, the rest of the notes, I just can't read it. It's gone. And the rest I've been able to piece together. George was my great-great-grandfather who went on to become the band leader of the Atlanta Volunteers in the Civil War. He was a great musician and founded the Chase Conservatory of Music. He had a son, George, who went on to take over the Conservatory of Music. And then George had a son named Charles Hoyt Chase, who had my father named George Chase. Here is a picture of the family in 1963, and Charles Hoyt Jr., my grandfather, is seated in the center. The tall men that look like they're obviously brothers, 3rd and 4th to the left, and the back row is George, my father, and my Uncle Charles. The girls that are twins are Carolyn and Isabel. They are Charles Hoyt's children. So they had 4 children. I do know he had a brother, Louis, and that is basically all I know. But the story is just heart-wrenching. She she literally was starving. She walked thousands of miles on her own. She was carrying a child. She buried a child, but one went on to live. And I just thought maybe people would be interested.